Doesn't matter if it's red or blue, you should be allowed to speak truth without fear of censorship.
Jimmy Kimmel is guilty of everything he's crying out against right now. And yes, wearing blackface. If you get caught doing that too many times, they make you the Prime Minister of Canada.
What we're finding, though, is that the MAGA movement really doesn't believe in the Constitution, doesn't believe in the First Amendment. It's a party of grievance, and it's a party of one.
2 people have now been confirmed dead, including the attacker, after a shooting by a suspected sniper at an immigration facility in Texas. The FBI says anti-ICE messages were found on rounds fired at the scene of the attack.
ICE is the new iteration of the war on law enforcement. If you don't like Donald Trump, don't vote for him. But don't kill the people who are following the orders to follow our immigration laws.
Jimmy Kimmel Live returned to ABC last night, ending days of frenzied debate about state censorship and conservative cancel culture. There was some contrition, but no apology, and a crystal clear message that free speech is under attack.
Look, I never imagined I would be in a situation like this. I barely paid attention in school. But one thing I did learn from Lenny Bruce and George Carlin and Howard Stern is that a government threat to silence a comedian the president doesn't like is anti-American. That's anti-American. And I am so glad we have some solidarity on that from the right and the left and from those in the middle like Joe Rogan. Maybe the silver lining from this is we found one thing we can agree on.
Personally, I find it quite hard to feel too much sympathy for Jimmy Kimmel, who only makes jokes about Republicans and only gives airtime to Democrats on what masquerades as a show for all Americans. And if conservatives are doing cancel culture now, they're not very good at it. He was silenced for all of 3 shows before returning to lash Trump on network TV in return for his $50 million salary. But that doesn't mean he's wrong about everything. The glee about his suspension by some free speech superfans was hypocritical. And the pressure from the FCC was outrageous and unacceptable. Government controls on ideas and speech are not just anti-American, they're anti-democratic and they're dangerous. That's why I fully expect all of the people who cried fascism and autocracy this week to condemn the news that the Biden administration bullied Google into closing down YouTube accounts it didn't like. That's a pretty huge free speech scandal about a platform which has an audience 1,500 times bigger than Kimmel's. But so far, the outrage about that has been pretty well non-existent, a bit like Kimmel's sympathy for the many cancelled TV stars that he didn't like, who always skew to the right. Well, here to debate this is comedian and host of Fox News on Saturday Night, Jimmy Failla, the CPAC chairman, Matt Schlapp, Daniel Coe, the former senior advisor to President Biden, now host of the People's Cabinet, and Mike Nellis, host of Endless Urgency and the brains behind White Dudes for Harris. Well, welcome to all of you. Jimmy Failla, it seemed to me a lot of stuff went on with this Kimmel thing, which is concerning. I think most people agree the FCC guy behaving like Don Corleone, not a good idea. Probably not a good idea for Donald Trump to be publicly saying the complete opposite to what his administration says, which is they're not interfering in Jimmy Kimmel and his free speech, when he clearly thinks they should be. But also a lot of hypocrisy from Kimmel, who's always led the charge in celebrating the downfall of people like Tucker Carlson, Roseanne Barr from his own network, gleefully trampling on their career graves, and a lot of hypocrisy from the left, who spent the last few years cancelling everyone they could think of, but then suddenly they've got a martyr, and because it's one of their own, then, oh, we've got to save this guy. Something they didn't apply to many, many, many people that they greedily cancelled in the last few years. So there's a lot here to unpack. But to me, the overriding thing that's important is people need to be consistent.
Yes. Well, that's where I would say, Piers, on the right, our reaction to this is that getting free speech advice from liberals is like getting marriage tips from O.J. Simpson. You don't exactly have the best record on this issue, because what are they reacting to? They're reacting to Brendan Carr, who I agree should not be talking as the FCC chairman in such a heavy-handed manner. But all the liberals are really proving is that they're on board with the government doing this in private, but not in public. Meaning we now know that they pressured Google in private, the government, senior White House officials under Joe Biden. We also know, courtesy of Mark Zuckerberg, that they went out and pressured Facebook to take down stuff that didn't jibe with their COVID ethos. So when I saw the Jimmy Kimmel thing last night, yes, it's good to see a comic back on the airwaves as someone who gets paid to say dumb things for a living. But let's not misconstrue this. We are not living in a world where the government fired him over a joke. The government, or at least his affiliates, took him off the air because he lied and misrepresented the political views of Charlie Kirk's shooter. That's what we were reacting to. We're not anti-comedy on the right. We have Greg Gutfeld, the highest rated show in late night. He is the king of late night. I come on Saturday night. I'm more like the Rodney King of late night. I get beat up a little bit, but we're doing okay because we like comedy. We just don't like the fact that liberals are misrepresenting conservative views to the extent that we're getting killed for it.
Okay, let's bring in Daniel Koger. You were a former senior advisor to President Biden. And I was stunned by the fact that yesterday there were two free speech stories. One involves a comedian who made a crass comment about Charlie Kirk's murder, whether he meant to or not, and only he really knows, but he absolutely inferred that the MAGA crowd were doing everything they could to try and pretend this guy wasn't one of theirs. Inference, he probably was. He says that's not what he inferred. Many people took it, that is what he inferred. But putting that to one side, you've got this other story breaking where Google have revealed officially that they were put under extreme pressure by the Biden administration, senior White House officials directly, telling them to censor accounts that were spreading, in their view, COVID and political misinformation. To me, that is far more egregious than Jimmy Kimmel on his own. So my question for you, I guess, is, did you know about what was going on with Google in terms of censoring these accounts? And do you agree with me that it is more serious, given the scale of it?
So I didn't know. I think it's fair to say that what is being described is incredibly concerning, and I want to learn more about exactly what the threats were. But I want to be very clear that it doesn't matter if it's red or blue, you should be allowed to speak truth without fear of censorship. So I agree with you being intellectually honest that we need to be very careful about curbing free speech, and we need to be incredibly concerned with what was just emerged that was allegedly done. The thing that I would say that I think is important to point out is that we can have the conversation about Kimmel, but Donald Trump has tried to silence journalists and institutions that have said truth that he just doesn't like. A $15 billion lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal for something he claimed was false that later came out as utterly true. So I think we need to make the distinction between what is being discussed and what is actual silence of actual truth.
Okay, Matt Schlapp, it seems to me on the right, a lot of people on the right have got themselves into a bit of a hypocritical pickle on this. Not all. I've watched people like Clay Travis, Ben Shapiro, Ted Cruz, a surprising group actually who've come out and were very intellectually honest. They said, look, if you think this is a good idea, it will come back and bite us. It will be used against us. And we have stood up against this kind of stuff for the last few years, and we can't do the opposite. Now it's someone, that we don't like. And I think that is intellectually honest. But a lot of people on the conservative right in America race to want to have Jimmy Kimmel cancelled, race to applaud what the FCC guy did, and so on. What do you feel about that? Because it seems to me, if the right starts to cede the high ground on free speech, it's got a problem.
Well, the best thing for my politics is to let Jimmy Kimmel have a show, because his ratings are so terrible. No one's really watching. He's not having much of an impact. And I think what we're getting all confused on is when government has the authority. Let's face it, the gentleman who just made this charge that Donald Trump's trying to shut down journalists or media outlets. Let me tell you, if Donald Trump had the authority, and it would be misused, in my opinion, if he did this, to shut down a journalist, one of those blue binders would have been signed. We would have had a press conference. The fact is, Donald Trump is working the refs, trying to get better coverage, because the media, as we all know in America, is highly tilted to the left. Now, this question of Jimmy Kimmel had nothing to do with the government. The question of Jimmy Kimmel was when you have these late night shows that are increasingly unfunny to people who have my politics, more than 50% of the country, at what point do these shows start to get canceled? And we've already seen this with Stephen Colbert. That's not a constitutional First Amendment question. This is a question about investors and people that run a company as to whether or not they want to have this host or that host. We're getting it all wrapped up into these other questions.
I agree. Listen, I don't disagree. However, today's show is brought to you by Oxford Natural, makers of the Optimum Day and Optimum Night all-natural supplements. Thousands of Brits and Americans are already taking them with incredible results. Optimum Day is designed to boost your energy and support weight loss throughout the day. Optimum Night helps you relax and get deep, refreshing sleep. And don't just take their word for it. Here are just a few of their success stories. England football legend Michael Owen lost 40 pounds. Robbie, the face of AFTV, dropped over 100 pounds. Linda, a top law firm executive, lost 50 pounds. And Anita, an immigration lawyer, shed 60 pounds. To watch their full stories and find out more, scan the QR code on your screen or visit oxfordnatural.com/Piers. And here's the best part. Use the code Piers, P-I-E-R-S, and get 70% off your first order. Get 70% off with the promo code Piers. You know, when Donald Trump posts on Truth Social like he has today, I can't believe ABC fake news gave Jimmy Kimmel his job back. The White House was told by ABC that his show was cancelled.
Yeah,
Something happened. Hang on, let me finish.
Sure.
Something happened between then and now because his audience is gone. His talent was never there. He's yet another arm of the DNC, and to the best of my knowledge, that would be a major illegal campaign contribution. I think we're going to test ABC out on this. Let's see how we do. Last time I went after them, they gave me $16 million. This one sounds even more lucrative. I mean, there he's talking about conversations he says happened between the White House and ABC, where assurances were given by ABC to the White House that Kimmel was out, and he's surprised that has now been reversed, and then saying he may sue over it. You know, this doesn't look like a president who wants to keep out of this. Looks like somebody who wants to influence it.
Big difference between what Joe Biden did, which is, and it wasn't just Google, it was all these social media companies. I think Jimmy's already brought it up. It happened with Facebook. I know it happened with every one of these major platforms where they were brought into the White House, and whether it was with the Surgeon General or the press secretary.
Yeah, but I agree. Let me stop
you
purely because I totally agree. In fact, I've just written a book called Woke is Dead, where I go over all this stuff, and it's shocking when you lay out the scale of what was going on in terms of the suppression. Notably, of course, the New York Post having its great bombshell scoop on Hunter Biden's laptop completely suppressed, right? So you won't get any argument from me about any of that. It's just even more incumbent, I would argue, for when the Republicans get power, that they then don't start to behave in a similar manner. Would you agree?
Yeah, but there's not a misuse of power for citizens and for Americans to take to the courts to ask this question. This is a fair question, Piers. Maybe the FCC doesn't have the ability to change what ABC does with these editing decisions, and they don't. That was about local broadcast stations. That wasn't about ABC or Disney. But the real question is a company that has a news organization, if they are 90% playing for one political party, for one side of the political argument, eventually you have this question of whether or not they are breaching these standards of colluding with one of those political parties. And that's what Donald Trump is bringing up in this truth on this post on Truth. And this is a very important part. It's the reason why we have such a divisive political nature, because the news went left, our major institutions went left, the late night talk shows went left, and those of us with my politics feel like, where do you go to find the truth?
Listen, I don't disagree. When you look at the graph I had posted earlier, which is just ridiculous how few conservative people the late night shows collectively have on it. And there's also a kind of farcical thing that they all bang on about diversity, and it's four middle-aged white guys, always has been. So there's a lot of hypocrisy there. Let me bring in Mike Nellis. Talking about the hypocrisy of Jimmy Kimmel in all this. It was pretty distasteful to see the clips re-emerge of him gleefully celebrating people like Tucker Carlson being fired, Roseanne Barr being fired by ABC. No holding back from him there, no racing to support them. But the person who I think really summed this up perfectly was Megyn Kelly, who posted today, "Remember when I was cancelled and held back the tears on air, and Kimmel stood up for me saying all she did was ask a question about blackface Halloween costumes, whereas I, Jimmy, have actually worn blackface many times and still have a show. This is wrong." And she added, "No, me neither. F him and his self-pity. And I want to show a picture of Jimmy Kimmel in blackface because that was Jimmy Kimmel. And by the yardstick of the cancel culture left for the last few years, he should have been cancelled for that alone. But he wasn't. And her point is a good one, Mike Nellis, isn't it? Hypocrisy. It's like, where was the defence for her when she said something far less offensive, frankly, than what Jimmy Kimmel said?
Well, Jimmy Kimmel has actually talked about repeatedly when he did blackface a million years ago. And I think to me, that's beside the point. The right actually had a pretty good argument to make that some aspects of cancel culture had gone too far. And what most of them have proven, and you see that in Matt's response right now, they didn't really believe in that. They love the idea of cancel culture. They want to be able to use it themselves. And that's why the entire MAGA movement was so gleeful when Jimmy Kimmel got suspended here. And let's be clear. Matt said that this doesn't have anything to do with the government. It has everything to do with the government. The only reason ABC suspended Kimmel in the first place was because Donald Trump's FCC threatened to remove ABC's broadcasting license. And the point on the affiliates, Matt, I didn't interrupt you. I'd ask if you didn't interrupt me, please. Thank you.
It's not right.
The whole thing with the Sinclair and the rest of the affiliates, like, they're working through a merger right now. So Donald Trump uses the power of the federal government to get what he wants, and that's what he's doing here. And I'm glad to see folks on the left, the right, the middle coming out, Joe Rogan, a whole bunch of other comedians. That's a good thing. What we're finding, though, is that the MAGA movement really doesn't believe in the Constitution, doesn't believe in the First Amendment. Also, I point out, doesn't really believe in the Second Amendment, because we're 2.5 weeks removed from them saying they were going to ban all transgender individuals in the country from having guns, and the NRA had to come out and rebuke them. So they don't really believe in these rights. They want to be able to use the power of the government to tell you, me, everybody else what to do in their image. That's
and do you believe, and okay, but using that yardstick, presumably you would condemn the Biden administration bullying Google into censoring YouTube accounts for talking about COVID?
So I think there's a huge difference between what we're talking about. When you talk about free speech, you don't have the right to shout fire in a crowded theater because people could get hurt. So I think it's worth having a conversation of, if people are intentionally spreading disinformation using social media platforms, can the government step in, have a conversation with the company? I'm happy to have that. I also have a hard time believing you can really bully Google, which is a massive corporation. Senior White House officials reaching out and saying, hey, this is dangerous at a time of crisis during the pandemic is not the same as Donald Trump threatening to remove the license for ABC.
Okay, Jimmy, you want to jump in there?
Yeah. Okay. The analogy of yelling fire in a crowded theater doesn't hold up here, because the government was telling us you don't have the right to yell accurate COVID information during a pandemic. People were being deplatformed for simply saying that vaccinated people were continuing to catch COVID. And one of the people cheering them on was Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel is guilty of everything he's crying out against right now in terms of cheering on other people's censorships. Yes, wearing blackface, which he better watch with the blackface, because if you get caught doing that too many times, they make you the Prime Minister of Canada. It's a very severe penalty. You've got to go be Justin Trudeau for
3 times Trudeau did it.
That's the bigger issue.
3 times Trudeau got caught doing that.
We're arguing. I mean, Piers, the big news was the Halloweens where he didn't do it. We were like, is he feeling okay? Why doesn't he have the blackface on? And that was Kimmel. He didn't do Karl Malone once. He did it multiple times.
Yeah.
That's why, as a comedian, I wasn't surprised to see him get Charlie Kirk Shooter wrong, because this is the same Jimmy Kimmel who thought he was a black guy who played for the Utah Jazz. But the point is, again, on the right, I get your point, and there's nuance to this, but we're still misrepresenting our views, okay? We do not want the government imposing heavy-handed censorship on comedians or anybody when it comes to speech rights. That's why there are people on the right saying Trump and Brendan Carr should ease off the throttle. We actually don't love this. We're capable of that distinction because in our party right now, we feel that the people are more important than the politics. Meaning the biggest divide in media right now is in the last 2 weeks, Republicans are mourning the guy who got shot. Democrats are mourning the $16 million a year late night host who got in trouble for misrepresenting the shooter's political ideology. And the reason Kimmel isn't going to win people back is when he came out there last night, he still misrepresented what the shooter stood for, because he said, this guy's a fringe lunatic, his views are his own. They're not his own. There's a Rasmussen poll out today that says 54% of liberals feel like the Charlie Kirk shooting was somewhat justified. Okay, we're not living in the same world. If you can't condemn that, unilaterally, regardless of political views.
Yeah, I
okay,
agree.
and that's why this
Can I jump in
doesn't
on that
come
for a
down
second?
to
Well, let me-
censorship
I
or
wanna-
anything else.
Uncensored is proudly sponsored by Cozy Earth, which, like me, delivers next-level quality and comfort. If I wasn't hosting this show today, I'd be wearing a pair of their bamboo joggers. Why? Well, they're buttery soft. They never lose their shape. And besides TV appearances, you can wear them for pretty much anything. Flights, school runs, or just relaxing at home. For those seeking intense comfort in more formal attire, take a look at their Everywhere pant. Lightweight, breathable, ludicrously flexible, but still polished enough to wear out. If you're ready to look sharp and feel great, go to cozyearth.com and use code PIERS, P-I-E-R-S, for up to 40% off joggers, pants, shirts, everything. And remember to tell them that I sent you. Cozy Earth, built for real life. I actually want to bring it on this point. I want to bring in Daniel again, because Hillary Clinton was on MSNBC today talking about the need for both sides to stop demonizing one another. I want to show that clip first, but then I want to show a clip about her talking about the Trump rally at Madison Square Garden right before the election. So let's watch these two.
We have got to stop demonizing each other.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, I think most of that right now in our country's history is coming, from the right, coming from people who want to dominate.
But that jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners.
So that was MSNBC, actually. There's another clip of Hillary herself, right, engaging in that nonsense about that rally, comparing it back to the genuine pro-Nazi rally. And my question for you, Daniel, is, for Hillary to start lecturing people about not demonizing one another when she was leading just before the election, this sentiment that somehow Trump's the new Adolf Hitler, followed by the new Nazis, it's pretty rich, isn't it?
Look, I think if the Rasmussen poll said that 54% of people think what happened to Charlie Kirk is somewhat justified, that's deplorable, and both sides of the aisle should speak ill of it and say that there's no place in it. I think Republicans who have called Kamala Harris, including the President of the United States, fascist, I think J.D. Vance calling Trump a Nazi in private was also inappropriate. But I think there's one thing that we should agree on, is that these tech CEOs are spineless and need to take a stand for what's right and not what's profitable. What do I mean by that? Someone like Mark Zuckerberg was all about fact checking, all about diversity and inclusion, which I stand for, during the Biden administration. And then all of a sudden Trump gets elected, he abandons diversity and inclusion, he fires all the fact checkers. I think what we need to unify around is some way to determine some sense of objective truth.
Well, yeah, but hang on. Wait a second, Daniel. Actually, Zuckerberg was the guy who fired all the fact checkers that he'd hired to.
That's what he's saying.
Yeah, but the reason he fired them was the fact checkers he brought in. It turned out were not checking facts; they were spinning things from a politically partisan, anti-Trump perspective. That was the irony. So the very people he brought in to check the facts were twisting them to suit an anti-Trump agenda. That's why he got rid of them.
Pierce, this is why John Adams, our second president, wanted to censor journalists, because you always have this question of politicians wanting to put their thumb on the scale. And what the answer from our founders was, we can all argue about what their politics were, but the reason why in politics the government should allow the First Amendment political speech to flow freely is because if you had multiple venues and way in which the American people could get information, they would determine within their own minds and in their own hearts what they thought the truth was. The problem we have in our society is everyone thinks someone can be dubbed as the truth teller, and it's never going to work. It's always going to be corrupted. And so I agree with my colleague on these social media platforms and their CEOs. They are spineless. They go with the winds to try to make even more money. And what the American people should do is not listen to them on what the truth is, but begin to get enough diverse opinions to make up their own minds. If we expect government to tell us what truth is, we are doomed.
Yeah, Mike Nellis, I'm just actually getting the exact wording of what Hillary said. about the Madison Square Garden event, because it is significant in relation to her call for less demonization. One thing you'll see, she said, is Trump actually reenacting the Nazi rally in 1939. When you do that and you're somebody who ran for president, you're not leading the campaign to stop people demonizing one another. You are literally comparing one of the candidates to be president a week later, I think the election was, to Adolf Hitler. And that, to me, crosses all lines. I just think there should be a complete ban on anyone, J.D. Vance, the same, anyone that invokes the name of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis about their political opponents in America right now. There should be some punishment for it, right? It is literally, because I look at it this way. If you look at the shooter for Charlie Kirk, right? People can argue till the cows come home about exactly what he stood for. We know he put anti-fascist sentiment on the bullet casings. Okay, we know that. So this is a guy who hated fascists. Probably identified Charlie Kirk as a fascist. Why? Because he'd heard time and again people calling Charlie Kirk a fascist. Probably thought that Donald Trump was Hitler. Why? Because he heard people like Hillary Clinton saying he's Hitler and saying his supporters are Nazis. If you're a deranged mind with easy access to firearms, and you keep hearing someone's Hitler or a Nazi, why wouldn't you want to kill them? Because if you think about it, you'd be doing America a massive service. You'd be taking out the new Adolf Hitler. And that's why language is so important. So Hillary's right, but is she the right messenger? Really?
Well, I do think you have way too many people on the left and the right who love to call somebody a Nazi at the drop of a hat to try and win an argument. I think it's very lazy, reductive thinking that a lot of people do. Now, I will push back on something, which is that I do believe Donald Trump is a fascist, and fascists use the power of the federal government to create the image of the country that they want, and they abuse it. We saw that with Jimmy Kimmel. We saw it this week. Matt was talking about how we shouldn't be suppressing the free press. But right now, the Pentagon's trying to tell reporters what they can or cannot report on, whether it's confidential information or not, or highly classified information or not. So this is a real thing. Like Donald Trump is consolidating power in this government. He is abusing that power to put money in his own pocket, to go after his political opponents, to go after Harvard, to go after law firms, to go after comedians, to go after anybody that he views as a threat or someone who has done him wrong. It's my biggest criticism of the modern day Republican Party. It is not a party of solutions to solve and help improve people's lives. It's a party of grievance, and it's a party of one. And what you see in Donald Trump is he's trying to become a single source of truth and a single source of morality for an entire group of people in this country. And I do think that's dangerous. And I am, like, Jesse, is that the name of the first panelist from Fox? I apologize. I don't know you before this.
You don't know Jimmy Failla?
Jimmy Failla, I apologize.
One of the most brilliant comedians in America.
I'm not trying to be a dick. I've just never.
I'll give you the $50 later, Piers.
Can you make it 60?
But you said that the left has been celebrating and not condemning what happened to Charlie Kirk. Every single major member of the Democratic Party, including myself, has condemned the violence that has happened.
Yeah, but we've also seen. But hang on, Mike. We've also seen Mike.
Ilhan Omar.
Mike, I have personally posted about 4 or 5 examples of professors at universities, teachers, doctors, right, and they are brazenly celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk on social media, and then they're surprised they get fired. Can I make this point, though?
Here's the thing. You have people on the internet who are going to say stupid things, and anybody who is celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder is doing the absolute wrong thing and should be condemned. I completely agree with that. The people on the left who are saying the most dangerous things about Kirk are random people on the internet. The people on the right who are saying the most dangerous things in this moment are Donald Trump.
They're not.
People like these scum. It's J.D. Vance who went on the internet to go tell everybody, go find people and cancel them. Where's the party of free speech in that? Come on.
No.
It's not the same thing.
This is...
Look, Ilhan... Piers.
Go ahead.
Ilhan Omar, AOC, and Jasmine Crockett are not random people on the internet. They may behave like random crazy people filming themselves with a nose ring and blue hair in a Subaru. But these are elected Democrat. They are still misrepresenting Charlie Kirk's views after his death. Like, that's disgusting. And when you talk about the misrepresentation of anything, Hillary Clinton saying that that Trump rally at Madison Square Garden was Nazi stuff, her husband accepted the Democratic presidential nomination at Madison Square Garden. So how is it Nazi time when Trump did it, but not when Bill did it? That's why the hypocrisy has to be called out.
Yeah, there's also, Matt, let me bring you in here. I mean, there's other very disturbing story developing today that 2 people have now been confirmed dead, including the attacker, after a shooting by a suspected sniper at an immigration facility in Texas. No ICE employees were injured, but detainees were hurt. The gunman died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The FBI says anti-ICE messages were found on rounds fired at the scene of the attack. Kash Patel shared a photo of the casings, one of which contains scrawled letters which literally say anti-ICE. Ted Cruz, Texas senator, said this has to stop, and linking it to the attack that killed Charlie Kirk and Nazi rhetoric, he said we should not be putting language out there that inspires madmen to commit evil crimes. And again, this comes back to the way people talk about people is important, especially people in public life with a big following. They can inspire deranged minds to do despicable acts.
Yeah, Piers, you brought up this idea that, bringing up the term Nazi, calling someone a Hitler, we should consider barring that or making there a punishment for that. And when we do our CPACs in Europe, this is a very commonly accepted idea. Swastikas are illegal to be displayed in Germany, et cetera. In America, we have a different tradition. I think it would be a mistake for us to start to criminalize these things. But there should be a huge social outpouring when disgusting people do trivialize violence against Charlie Kirk or anything else. And we had this whole BLM fiasco throughout this country that was fueled and funded by corporate America and the left. And it was a war on cops. And it resulted in a lot of cops getting hurt, one famously being shot in St. Louis, and a lot of people deciding they were going to leave the profession. ICE is the new iteration of the war on law enforcement. Now, if you don't like Donald Trump, don't vote for him. But don't kill the people who are following the orders to follow our immigration laws. It is an absurd thing, and the left and the Democratic Party should immediately, today, call on the end of this rhetoric against these police officers who are simply upholding the law that the American people just overwhelmingly supported in the last presidential election. They wanted to close down the border and have law-based immigration.
Yeah, you see, Daniel, my view is I have exactly the same view of this stuff if it was the other way around. I just think that it doesn't matter to me whether it's coming from the left or right. It's just words do have consequences. And it's not really a free speech issue. It's more like, what do we do about this? If it becomes, look, for example, if you say the N-word, if one of you said the N-word now, right, there would be immediate career and social consequences for you, dramatically, right? You probably wouldn't be on television again. We all know that. We accept that, right? It's not a crime. You couldn't be arrested and put in prison for it, but you would have dramatic consequences. Yet people toss around the Hitler Nazi stuff all the time on the airwaves with zero consequence, even though I believe it has a really insidious impact on deranged young minds. Who knows what in the end motivated Charlie Kirk's assassin to do what he did? We know about the anti-fascist slogan on the bullets, so we know that was part of his thinking. Who knows whether he just believed Charlie Kirk was the worst fascist in America because he'd seen it on TikTok and decided it was his civic duty to do what he did, to stop a genuine fascist, right? Who knows? We may never find out. I hope we do, but we may never find out. But what I do know is when people toss around this kind of stuff on the airways all the time, it is dangerous.
Look, I think calling for political violence, and I want to be very clear, it's on both sides have called for political violence on opponents on their side, has no place in our country. The thing that concerns me, though, is that there are some things that we should agree are true. The sky is blue. It is not purple. But increasingly so, especially online, you are seeing information with absolutely no regulation and no way to even fact check. And so when Trump is going after journalists, going after the Wall Street Journal, which I would argue is not a liberal publication, by the way.
It's liberal.
For something that he doesn't like, not that isn't true. That's what concerns me about this kind of government intervention. And I would say the same thing if it becomes true that the Biden administration was trying to silence and deplatform people on YouTube because they just didn't like what they had to say. Okay. I think we need to be intellectually honest about that. And I think the fact is that Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and all of them are abdicating their duty to put Grok out front to make sure that people know what the truth is, because people are getting confused. You just take one step at Charlie Kirk conspiracy theories about how he was killed. They said there was one tweet I saw that had millions of views that a black dot moved across his shirt. That was his microphone. But there was no correction there, right? And that's what I think is damaging to our society.
But I do think having everyone be very critical of the tech bosses, that what Elon's done with things like Grok has been great. You know, I read people saying ridiculous stuff about me that's never been corrected in real time before, and I see Grok immediately correcting them, and it's great, right? It's just another public figure. I like the fact a lot of mythology, which has been fueled by social media about anyone in, in public life, that actually gets corrected in real time. Love it. I've got to leave it there. Great debate. Yeah. Jimmy, I know who you are. I know how great you are. I know who you are now, Jimmy. I will be watching your show this weekend. I sincerely advise Mike Nellis to watch it, because it's one of the funniest things on TV. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Piers Morgan Uncensored is proudly independent. The only boss around here is me. If you enjoy our show, we ask for only one simple thing. Hit subscribe on YouTube and follow Piers Morgan Uncensored on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in return, we will continue our mission to inform, irritate and entertain. And we'll do it all for free. Independent, uncensored media has never been more critical, and we couldn't do it without you.